CLCS 220, Inventing the Past, the Uses of Memory. I'm Liz Drachenberg, and I'm a senior in class of 2012.
I'm Charlotte Reimer. I'm also a senior from the class of 2012.
I'm Isabeau and I'm the class of 2013. I'm a junior.
And for our final project for this class, we really wanted to look at Franklin's identity and Franklin's memory.
So by doing that, we were going to go around and interview students and professors to find out what they really had to say about it.
What do you consider to be the Franklin identity?
Franklin is the island of misfit toys.
Well, I define identity in terms of shared values, right? So I think of the Franklin identity in terms of what values we share.
Somebody who enjoys having a broader view of things, who are interested in learning about what's going on out there, outside their normal circles.
Franklin identity is probably traveling, if that's it. Somebody who travels.
International education, ideally intercultural sensitivity, ideally social responsibility, particularly sustainability.
I think Franklin identity is about just interactions with different cultures and students learning a lot of different languages while they're here and learning a lot of things that they can't really learn in class, and I think that this is a big part of the Franklin identity that I don't think a lot of colleges out there have.
But I think there's a difference between the representation of Franklin and what Franklin really is.
I think it's about people who want to challenge themselves.
And I think this is something that we talk so much about in admissions is I think one big thing is that for the most part students choose Franklin College. I do not believe that we have people on this campus who would say, my mom and dad forced me to go to this school.
I think Franklin is made up with a whole bunch of different students who come here looking for either exploration or something that they want to accomplish in their life.
I think it's changed. It changes every year. It's definitely completely changed since I came here. When I was here, the school was definitely much wilder, and it was kind of a wild abandon of everything and just flitting around Europe.
The Franklin identity was much more asserted years back than it is now, because I have the feeling that if, for instance, we didn't have our signature program, which is academic travel, we have a tendency, and maybe my colleague who is in the class with you will disagree with me, but we have a tendency to want to be like the others, like American university colleges, and I don't know if that is the spirit of what Franklin was. So am I attaching, am I being nostalgic? Is that something that I have constructed? I think that sense of community was stronger, and that the identity of Franklin, because it was so not like the other universities we are comparing ourselves to, was much stronger. That's my opinion.
What do you consider to be the Franklin identity?
Someone who likes to travel, who likes to see the world, because being in Switzerland is not, the first option for a lot of people, so I guess it's more attractive for people that are willing to experiment and see the world more than actually studying, because there are better programs somewhere else, education-wise.
Someone who's a student but also a world traveler, really open about ideas. Because I personally, that's how I evolved actually, is that I became more knowledgeable of different areas of the world.
And essentially being sensitive to not just cultures, but sexual orientation and political views, and we just all see the world differently, and that's certainly the way we appreciate diversity, and hopefully that is the Franklin identity.
What is the Franklin history?
I don't know. I have no idea.
What is the Franklin history?
Started sometime this century.
What is the Franklin history? What I know about the Franklin history is that I think it was started in the 60s or 70s by 4 men who decided to start a school in Lugano because they were used to work at TASIS, and they decided that they wanted to start a college.
Essentially, Miss Muzzi founded it.
Okay.
With the help of Professor Schlein.
The Franklin history. That I don't know. You know, I hear tidbits of it from, you know, its founding, the whole Fleming's college thing, but I really don't know.
How I found out about Franklin was a man in an antique shop in Nantucket, and he told me about how Franklin used to be a 2-year school, and freshmen used to come over on cruise ships, and sophomores would fly over to Germany, and the freshmen would go to Italy, and they would trek through and meet in Switzerland, and that was the first academic travel of the year. They used to do 4 a year, not just 2 a year.
It used to be a private school that was recently opened to the public.
Franklin history, I might know, is that it started as a travel group led by some women who, when girls would graduate college or high school, before they went to college, they would come here and get on a bus and tour Europe for a few weeks.
It was founded by a couple of lone wolf professors that decided that they could do it better. And they said, "The heck with your school, I'm gonna make Franklin," and they did.
You're not a member of staff at the school if you don't actually become involved. I think there's no actual anything to be known about the Franklin history other than random photographs on the walls of old campuses.
It's gone through various stages of growth and various stages of persona.
Franklin was founded in 1969, and I think most people kind of don't tend to know the real story behind it, but we were in some ways co-founded with the starter of TASIS, the American school in Switzerland, just up the road from us in Montagnola.
It started out as a postgraduate program in the American school, TASIS, up the road. And Mrs. Fleming had always wanted to start a postgraduate program. And but essentially there were members of her board that wanted to do things a bit differently, and in fact ultimately decided to start a postgraduate program without Mrs. Fleming. You know, as the saying goes, things went boom.
So basically we started on the same idea of taking the American style of education and bringing it here to Ticino.
Franklin College essentially started out as a college with a bunch of radicals, essentially, who broke away from the system, all right? And they wanted to do things very differently in terms of how they approached teaching and small classes and academic travel, you know, and loading students in a VW bus and driving to London in the old days like Brian Stanford used to do, you know.
It was, I think, you know, that at that time, Franklin had an identity in the sense that because it was made of the brick and the broc.
And obviously it's developed from being kind of a year or a semester experience for people within their university experience, and then very much us believing, I guess, in ourselves to become kind of the 4-year undergraduate experience that we are today.
Do you think that the Franklin history is important to the Franklin identity?
Not necessarily, because I think Franklin, the culture changes so much, so quickly, because, you know, you have a lot of students that come in and go each year. You have a lot of staff members, faculty members that, you know, only come for and stay for a short period of time. And I think, you know, each one of those people, each person adds something and takes away something. So I think, you know, in terms of history, Franklin's culture is very fluid.
Do you think that the Franklin history is important to the Franklin identity?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. You know, very much so. I mean, you know, you've been students in my classes, you know, and you know that I always stress history for context, right? For, you know, trying to put what's happening today in sort of a historical context. What's the backdrop? You know, maybe we could do a better job of giving students a better sense of the context of where we are today in terms of where we've been.
I think it is because we're such a young school. Franklin is only 42 years old or something like that, so we have to be able to identify with our history because it's so recent and it's so important. defining who we are and why we're different.
The one thing I loved is that whether you met somebody who graduated from the college or was a part of it in 1972 or was the year before you, the fact is that they stopped to tell you what an amazing experience it was for them. And the fact is that whether it was the same experience or different, the point is that they lit up, and we're just like, they would never take back the time that they had here in Lugano. And I think you see that even now, as we kind of get into graduation, the global alumni reunions, that it really doesn't matter whether you went to school particularly with these people, but the fact is that there is a common thread, and what Lugano means to us, what Franklin means to us.
I do not think that the Franklin history is important to identity. I think that's exemplified by the fact that most students don't know the history of the school, even though it's a very young history. But I think that a lot of the legends are important to the Franklin identity and understanding of who we are.
What are some Franklin legends?
What are some Franklin legends that you can think of?
The Greek Club, infamous Greek Club.
What happened, do you think?
People got, Uzo was involved, I heard, and there was a lot of broken windows, I heard.
It's funny for me to think now it's going to be 5 years since I graduated, to I guess hear certain kind of myths about things that happened while I was at Franklin. I guess one of the most kind of controversial, that goes along with it is of course Greek night, and how you hear these disastrous stories of, us being shut down, and I mean, as if we caused the worst trouble on campus. And I always laugh about the fact that if you ever looked at the executive board for the Greek Club, it was basically the SGA president, the secretary, and people that were orientation leaders and things like that. So I didn't think that we were kind of the hooligans of the school. But it's really great to think that the first Greek night really started in the Falcon's Nest, and we ended the evening by probably smashing about 150 plates, which we were really proud of, and obviously kind of represented the spirit of what it was, and then to see its kind of development in
Franklin legends. You hear so many stories about past students that are like horrible and embarrassing and disgusting, and you're like, I really hope I never become like Bloodbath Girl or something like that. There's also the legend of the girl who fell between the train and the platform and got her legs cut off, and I think she actually works at Tassus now. Her parents apparently abandoned her. And people being left behind on travels and da-da-da, but other than that, like, a lot of what you hear is just gossip.
Originally, the postgraduate program was going to be called Fleming College, and apparently, as the story goes, I don't know if this is true or not, but they had printed stationery with an F on it, right, for Fleming College, and so they said, okay, we should perhaps call it something that begins with an F, right? So they thought of the first ambassador to Europe, right? And Benjamin Franklin, all right? So allegedly that's, I mean, maybe that's part of the oral history that isn't quite correct, but at least it is part of the history, that people mention when they talk about the growth and the history of Franklin College.
Mainly, jumping in the lake naked, or how to cheat on tests, or crazy things that have happened on travel. I've heard some bad stories, such as jumping out of the Florida balcony into the pool.
I heard a lot of, honestly, the biggest things I heard were about travel.
When I hear Franklin legend, I think of people that have done extraordinary things. People that run up Sand Sal naked because they like to. Extraordinary partiers with extreme endurance for drinking. Or those people that go on stage and just can crack you up in a second. The legends that you just meet, you're like, wow, you are one of the most unique people I've ever met in my entire life.
The faculty that have been here, like the Floyd Parsons, he's a legend, and he's retiring this year. So I think that, the legends of Franklin are kind of unique to our history.
People getting drunk and stuff like that. I mean, this is the first thing you know.
The first one that comes to my head is the ghost of Florida. So, well, the building Florida used to be a brothel. So, and I think the way I heard it was that one of the employees there, she fell down the chute, because I think all the floors were connected via a laundry chute, and she fell down the chute, and that's how she died. And her spirit's still there. So.
That if you don't drink from the fountain, then you're gonna fail all your exams. And then when I was a freshman, we walked past the house that was right next to the fountain, and they said that one of the kids stole one of the dwarves one year, and so he became legend and expelled.
Do you feel part of the Franklin identity?
Yeah, in the sense that I know I'm not that involved in activities in Franklin, but I mean, it definitely changed my perspective in so many ways, and like meeting people from different cultures was the biggest part of my experience.
Do you feel a part of the Franklin identity?
Yes.
I do. I think I feel more so because I've been here for 4 years now, and I've also become involved with every aspect of the school, from admissions to orientation to running student clubs to being on the student government. So I've really immersed myself in everything that is Franklin, as well as broken through the Franklin bubble. So I feel like I've been able to become a part of it on multiple levels, on campus and off.
Do you feel a part of the Franklin identity?
Yeah, sure. Yes. At this point.
When you construct, memories are constructed. So when you construct, these memories, well, they shouldn't, each of us, is going to have a specific, narrative. What we have to be careful with is that these narratives do not prevent us to go forward. That our boards of administration has a certain view, has constructed a certain view of Franklin College, and they are not letting us construct what we want Franklin College, because we don't have the means to construct this new identity.
Could you describe Franklin in one phrase or one word?
Franklin is as close to Hogwarts as any school will ever get.
Short.
Cross-culturally adventurous.
Exploration.
A unique experience.
Academic travel.
Cultural understanding.
Not sustainable.
University.
I always say this is one word that, we have, Italians have it, it's also in my mother tongue of Slovak and whatnot. In Slovak it's the word, simpatický, and, simpatico in Italian and whatnot. And we can't translate into English, and I think it's such a great way to describe a person that really exemplifies this quality of, just being welcoming and kind, and just has that certain, attraction, that it's almost like a magnet. You really want to be in that person's presence, to talk to them, to be around them and whatnot. And I think that's really what Franklin has, is that for as much as, we love it, we hate it and whatnot, at the end of the day, this is, I think, home for so many of us, and this is the time that you will think back to for the rest of your life.
Here's what I thought was interesting. When we asked people if there was a Franklin identity, they all had a very clear answer. It all had something to do with traveling, intercultural education, etc. But when we asked Franklin history, some people didn't know what it was, and even some students said it wasn't important to the Franklin identity. But all of the legends, I thought, everyone thought, were important. So I thought that's interesting, that Franklin's history actually is maybe its oral history and not its official history. And this has to do kind of with Benedict Anderson and the construction of nation. If we look at Franklin as sort of a nation, and he talks a lot about fiction and how fiction shapes a nation, and sort of shared community and identity. And so I think we see that in the legends. Sometimes we run into this problem though of constructing memory at Franklin because our population changes so much, because people come and go, because there's so much fluidity, that sometimes it's hard, I think, for Franklin to really form a shared sense of identity, and we forget maybe one part of it and adapt a new part. So Franklin is very fluid compared, I think, to other, what Anderson would call, nations.
So Hallbox talks about collective memory, and the key to collective memory is the collective framework of memory. And so individuals take their individual memories and place them within the collective framework, and that's how collective memory is formed. With Franklin, it's really interesting because the collective memory is normally really strongly rooted to a location. And here it is rooted to the campuses and to Serango or Lugano, but it also exists on a completely non-physical level because so much of the collective identity of Franklin comes from traveling, comes from going to more than one place, being lots of places. So the collective framework of Franklin has to be in all of these places at once. It exists in London, it exists in Budapest, in Prague, in Sicily, and thus the memories of the people, the students have from traveling to these places get inserted into the collective framework of memory. And so the collective identity of Franklin is really strongly about traveling, about being more than one place. So does this make it stronger or does it weaken the collective identity? You could argue it both ways. Halbach also talks about the role of the elderly in preserving collective memory, which is interesting for Franklin because seniors like myself, like Charlotte, and like some of the students you see in the video form a really active role in the construction of the memory of Franklin, and professors even more so with their knowledge of the history of Franklin.
In one of the interviews, I interviewed Professor Parsons, and he was not being willing to be filmed, but he said something really interesting in the sense that our memory must be maintained to be a part of our identity. And that is really crucial in the sense of like what Anna Kuhn said in Her Memory of Textuality. She described memory work as the act of remembering and incorporating it into our identity. And within the context of Franklin College, we don't actively incorporate our history into our identity, and so thus it's forgotten and doesn't play an active or important role in our identity right now.